The question is the bill now be read a second time. I call the member for Ballina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm very proud to rise and speak in support of the Greens Residential Tenancies Amendment Rent Freeze Bill 2023 and commend our housing spokesperson Jenny Leong for her work in this space. Mr Speaker, rent freezes are not radical. You would think that what we were talking about here was something truly radical. It's certainly not radical in Germany, where they have recently announced a 3-year rent freeze. In 2020, the Victorian government recognised the housing affordability crisis brought on by the pandemic and froze rents for 6 months. None of these chicken little arguments applied there. And a number of other jurisdictions have rent caps in place. The Australian Capital Territory, where the Greens, I'm very proud to say, are in balance of power, they've put in a rent cap. And the reason that they have is because we are in an extreme housing crisis. And I said recently that the two existential crises I believe we face, certainly in my community, is the housing crisis and the climate crisis. And my community, sadly, are living through that, as are other communities here, having on the back of the 2019 Black Summer bushfires, the pandemic, where we had a mass exodus of people from the city moving to our region, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and then unfortunately a lot of those people then were flood affected, and we have, like, it is beyond the pale, the crisis, the housing crisis in our area. And I would have thought that this government would be looking at to try to pull every single lever and to rule it out. And I'm sorry, it seems ideological, because whilst the word rent cap seems to be, some people are comfortable with that. For some reason, the idea of a rent freeze is being demonised, but I can tell you right now, you go back to your communities and you talk to renters and they will not be demonising the concept of rent freezing. Now, Mr Speaker, the spurious argument of supply. So I've been here nearly 9 years, and honestly, I'm so sick to death of hearing this argument. Why? Because it lacks any nuance about which houses, who are they for, where are they going. Granularity it's essential. I'll give you an example, Mr Speaker. The whole of West Byron. So my community stridently opposed that development, primarily because it's in a flood zone. It's not just a flood zone, it's a swamp. It's the Cumbeeben swamp. Unfortunately, we did not win that battle. But this was literally touted to our community as the potential for affordable housing. And what have we got now? What we have in West Byron is a minimum land value of $1.2 million. There is nobody that I know that's going to be living in West Byron, and there is certainly, if any of it, if we can manage to finally get the 60-day cap on short-term holiday letting, which has now been kicked, we're very grateful that it's been greenlit again, but we are waiting until September next year. We just can't wait for these things. So at the moment in West Byron, there's absolutely no incentivisation for anyone to be offering affordable rents, for anyone to indeed be offering affordable housing. And unfortunately, that supply answer does not address the fact that nobody can afford to live there. So in my community, we've had the legacy of holiday letting out of control, unfettered. It still is today, and so we have the extra layer that any properties that may be suitable for our frontline workers to live in and rent, or indeed our families in my community, are on the online platforms because they can make so much more money. And so the supply alone does not work. And I'm very proud of the work that our spokesperson has done, which is extremely supported by data, extremely well supported by evidence. Everybody's Home, according to their recent analysis, 82% of renters in New South Wales are living in housing stress. I mean, I'm actually really surprised. Why does the government not think that this would be extraordinarily popular to give some respite? I also think, as a landlord myself, I also think that give landlords an incentive as well. Give them an incentive. We're not suggesting that we're not demonising landlords. We know that we won't have rental properties without landlords. However, the scale is tipped the other way. It's completely out of balance. There's nothing to stop. So to give you an example, someone told me in Mullumbimby a couple of weeks ago, for a granny flat, there was 1,100 applicants for a granny flat in Mullumbimby. So what that tells you is that the imbalance of power, there is an extraordinary imbalance of power. Everyone in our Northern Rivers community has seen the rental crisis close up. Every day I drive past cafes left closed because our hospitality workers can't find a single affordable rental in the region. We've all seen construction delayed after the floods, and everyone who has kids in our region who do not even contemplate buying in the area that they grew up, or indeed renting. They are living with their families. Now, I understand, the Minister for Planning today talked about that intergenerational disadvantage that we see, but this is an answer. This is a solution. Give it a try. Give it a case study, whatever you want to call it. But the idea that you just dismiss it out of mind is absurd. Renters constantly come to me and say that they feel completely powerless. Property investors are entitled to negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions, and they can't even get their pet living with them, let alone afford the rents in my region, which are comparable to Sydney. And as I say, rent freezes are not radical. I understand the government wants to increase the supply of housing. We get that there needs to be targets for supply, but I come back to this again and again. Who are these houses for? Who are they for? And as our spokesperson said this week, the issue with selling off of Crown land, of public land, of common land, and somehow gifting 70% of that to developers, it's absurd. They do not need more incentive. What we do need is to give incentives to genuinely offer affordable housing that is below market rate and long leases. What can you give to incentivise that? The only support for renters that National Cabinet has on offer right now is a 12-month restriction on how often rents can increase. When you see the rents, I go and visit some of the terribly flood-affected residents in my electorate who are living in the pod villages post-floods, and they're doing it tough, and they are trying to transition from those pods back into the community. Many of them displaced from Lismore, and they've found themselves on the coast absolutely unable to transition, and that is horrendous. And there are 800 people on a wait list to be in one of those pods. They've got nowhere to go. And if a person gets kicked out of those pods, they've got nowhere to go. They're on the street. So something has to give. We've got to do something. And I'm not going to sit here and wait. Like, we can't, let's have another housing task force. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, if I contribute another submission to a housing task force, I'm going to scream, because we keep saying the same things. Liberals and Nationals and Labor keep saying the same things, which is that supply is the answer. And it absolutely, how's it going for us? It hasn't worked at all. Regardless of the outcome today, and I encourage every member to contemplate every renter in their electorate, the Greens will continue to campaign on this issue. We've successfully pressured this government to end no grounds evictions in New South Wales, and my federal government colleagues have secured an additional $3 billion of immediate spending from the federal Labor government on affordable housing. And despite the fact that some Labor MPs are out there, federal MPs, saying that the Greens are holding up housing developments, well, we got an extra $3 billion. And quite frankly, in this budget, the amount of money for social housing was pitiful, absolutely pitiful. So honestly, as we enter the apocalypse, when it comes to climate change, The other huge factor is housing, and I think this Premier should be spending all his time on those two existential crises, because that is a fundamental right for people to have a safe and secure home and to be protected from what is coming down the line. And as we see over 70 fires, another drought on the back of floods, I urge Labor to take this very, very seriously and look for every opportunity to alleviate the stress that our communities are under.
Yeah.